Hey everyone, it's Emily here. Before I dive into the most unbelievable story of my life, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I never thought I'd be making a video like this, but some stories need to be told, especially when they involve a $500,000 inheritance, family betrayal, and the 350-acre ranch in Montana that became both my salvation and their downfall. I'm Emily Harrington, 32, third-generation cattle rancher and, until 6 months ago, a corporate attorney in Chicago with a corner office and a life that looked perfect on paper. That was before I discovered what family is truly capable of when money and jealousy collide. My grandmother Elaine was a force of nature, the kind of woman who wore diamond rings while mending fences and could make a banker stammer with just a raised eyebrow. She built Clearwater Ranch from nothing after my grandfather died young, raising my father alone while expanding the operation to become one of the most respected heritage cattle breeding programs in the Northern Rockies. I spent every summer with her until college, learning to ride before I could properly walk, helping with calving season, and sitting beside her in the study as she taught me about land management and the business of agriculture. My sister Madeline, 3 years younger, preferred shopping malls to saddle sores and made excuses to stay in Seattle with our parents. Gran never held it against her, but we all knew I was being groomed for something. This land has a heartbeat, Gran would tell me, and it beats in time with yours, Emily. When she slipped that antique emerald ring, her own grandmother's, onto my finger on my 16th birthday, she whispered, "This and the land are one and the same, precious beyond measure and meant to be protected." The call came during a deposition in Chicago, my phone vibrating persistently until I finally excused myself. Dad's voice cracked as he told me Gran had passed peacefully in her sleep. I was on a plane within hours, arriving at the ranch where the Montana sunset painted the mountains with the same fiery orange as Gran's hair had been in her youth. The reading of the will was scheduled for after the funeral, but everyone assumed the ranch would go to my father, her only child. What no one expected, least of all my parents, was for Gran to leave Clearwater Ranch directly to me, along with her substantial investment portfolio. To Emily, the attorney read from Gran's will, who understands that wealth is measured not by what you spend but by what you nurture and protect. My sister received a generous trust fund, my parents a vacation property in Colorado and a monetary gift. But the ranch, nearly 350 acres of prime Montana grazing land, worth approximately $12 million, and Gran's emerald ring, independently appraised at $590,000 due to its rare Colombian emerald and historical provenance, were mine. I watched my mother's face drain of color and my father's hands begin to tremble, while Madeline's mascara tracked down her cheeks. That moment, their silent shock transforming slowly into something darker, was when the first hairline fracture appeared in our family, though I didn't yet recognize it for the catastrophic break it would become. I didn't immediately quit my job or sell my condo in Chicago. Instead, I arranged for Gran's trusted foreman, Jack, to continue managing day-to-day operations while I sorted through the emotional and logistical maze of my inheritance. The emerald ring stayed on my finger, a constant connection to Gran and a reminder of her faith in me. During video calls with Jack, I'd unconsciously twist it, drawing comfort from its solid presence as we discussed cattle prices and replacement fencing. My parents maintained a brittle politeness during those first few weeks, though Mom occasionally made pointed comments about fair division and family legacy. Dad mostly stayed silent, his disappointment visible in the new lines around his mouth. Madeline, however, wasted no time making her feelings known, texting me links to articles about siblings contesting wills and sending late-night voice messages questioning why I, with my fancy law degree and big city salary, needed a ranch or an heirloom when she was struggling to find direction. I ignored most of these, chalking them up to grief and shock, believing time would heal these wounds. 3 months after Gran's funeral, I finally took a 2-week leave from my firm to properly assess the ranch and make decisions about its future. The moment I drove through those iron gates, something shifted inside me like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Each morning I woke before dawn, pulling on boots and jeans instead of heels and suits, moving among the cattle as the sun crested the eastern ridge. I reviewed the books in Gran's office, surrounded by her collection of Western literature and the faint scent of her rose perfume that still clung to the curtains. By the end of the first week, the decision had made itself: I belonged here. I drafted my resignation letter on Gran's ancient desk, feeling her approval like a physical presence in the room. I called my parents to share my plans, hoping they'd understand this wasn't just about money or property, it was about honoring a legacy and following a calling I'd felt since childhood. Dad said he was glad someone in the family would keep it going, his voice tight but resigned. Mom was less diplomatic. "You're throwing away a prestigious career to play cowgirl? That's the thanks we get for putting you through law school?" I was still reeling from that conversation when Madeline arrived unannounced the next day, eyes red-rimmed, claiming she needed sister time. Something about her sudden appearance set off warning bells, but I welcomed her anyway, showing her around the operation, introducing her to the staff. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone, asking odd questions about the ranch's finances and my long-term plans. That night, after sharing a bottle of wine on the porch, she broke down, confessing she'd been self-medicating for anxiety with substances that had grown increasingly expensive and dangerous. "I need help, Em," she sobbed, clutching my hands. "There's this wellness retreat in Bali, it's the real deal, not some tourist trap. They specialize in addiction and trauma recovery. The therapist says I need 3 months minimum, but the cost." She trailed off, eyes fixing on my ring in a way that made my stomach clench. "I just need a fresh start. You have all this now, the ranch, Gran's money. Can't you help me?" The manipulation was so transparent it should have been laughable, but the desperation in her eyes wasn't feigned. I promised to look into legitimate treatment options back home, quality rehab centers covered by insurance. Madeline nodded through tears, hugging me tightly before going to bed, but her gaze returned to my ring repeatedly, a calculation there that disturbed my sleep long after she retreated to the guest room. I woke the next morning with a strange heaviness in my chest, a premonition I couldn't shake. Madeline's bedroom door was closed, so I moved quietly through my morning routine, checking emails before heading out to meet Jack about a fence repair on the north pasture. It wasn't until I reached for my coffee mug that I realized my ring was missing. I always placed it on the small dish by the sink while I showered, a habit formed to protect the antique setting. My heart rate doubled as I searched frantically, emptying drawers, checking pockets, crawling under furniture. Jack found me an hour later, tear-stained and frantic. "Someone took Gran's ring," I managed, my voice breaking. The ranch hands formed search parties, combing through buildings and fields, while I called the county sheriff. Officer Reeves arrived by mid-morning, taking statements and photographs, promising to check pawnshops and jewelers in the surrounding counties. I couldn't bring myself to openly accuse Madeline, who had conveniently gone for a drive and wasn't answering her phone, but the timing was too suspicious to ignore. When my parents arrived that evening without warning, I initially felt relief until I noticed Mom's tight expression and Dad's inability to meet my eyes. "We need to talk about Madeline," Mom began, settling into Gran's favorite armchair like she owned it. "She's in crisis, Emily. Real crisis. Not everyone has your stability or advantages." Dad nodded along, finally adding, "The ring is safe. We have it." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me as they explained how Madeline had called them in tears, confessing her addiction issues and her certainty that the Bali retreat was her last chance at healing. They'd driven through the night to meet her at a rest stop where she'd handed over my ring, my inheritance, my connection to Gran. "We've already spoken with a buyer, a private collector who understands the urgency. He's offering $480,000, which covers the retreat and gives Madeline something to rebuild her life with afterward." Mom's tone suggested I should be pleased with this arrangement. When I asked how they could possibly think this was acceptable, Dad's response gutted me. "Your grandmother would have wanted the ring used this way to save her granddaughter's life." Rage and disbelief left me speechless, my legal training the only thing keeping me from completely losing control. "That ring is legally mine. What you're describing is theft and trafficking in stolen property." I pulled out my phone, showing them the police report already filed. "You have exactly 12 hours to return it before I press charges against all 3 of you." Mom's face contorted with an ugly mixture of shock and indignation. "You would send your own sister to jail? For what, a piece of jewelry? This is exactly why your grandmother's decision was so misguided. You've always been selfish, even as a child. Always the favorite, always the special one." Dad, finally finding some backbone, added, "The sale is already processing, Emily. The buyer is flying in tomorrow to authenticate it before finalizing payment. Madeline is booked on a flight to Bali the following day. This isn't a negotiation, it's a courtesy notification. They left minutes later, ignoring my warnings about legal consequences, Mom pausing only to say, "When you've calmed down and remembered what family truly means, we'll discuss how you can make this right." As their car disappeared down the driveway, I made 2 calls, one to my former law firm's top criminal attorney, and another to a private investigator I'd once worked with on a corporate case. The die was cast, and with it, any remaining illusion that blood trumped betrayal. That night was the longest of my life, pacing Gran's study until dawn while the weight of what I was about to do pressed against my chest like a stone. Sheriff Reeves called early the next morning. They'd found no sign of the ring at local pawnshops, but he'd expanded the alert to neighboring counties. I thanked him without revealing what I now knew, buying time for my own plan to unfold. By 8 a.m., my former colleague Marcus Donnelly was on a video call, his reputation as Chicago's most ruthless criminal defense attorney well earned. "Family theft cases are messy," he warned, his voice grave. "Are you prepared for what this means?" I twisted my empty ring finger, feeling the phantom weight of Gran's emerald. "They've left me no choice." Within an hour, Marcus had drafted emergency court orders to freeze any potential sale and was filing theft charges with provisions for interstate conspiracy. Meanwhile, Rhonda Blackwell, the PI, had already located my parents at the Four Seasons in Bozeman and was tracking the mysterious buyer's incoming flight. The plan crystallized with brutal clarity. I would need to catch them in the act of selling stolen property. Marcus advised against confronting them directly, let the law do its work, he counseled, but something in me couldn't accept the clinical coldness of that approach. These were my parents, however misguided, and my sister, however damaged. I needed to give them one final chance to recognize the magnitude of their betrayal. I spent the rest of the morning composing a detailed email, attaching Gran's will, the police report, and a letter from Marcus outlining the potential legal consequences they faced: felony theft charges, interstate trafficking of stolen goods, conspiracy. I concluded with an offer: return the ring immediately, and I will consider dropping criminal charges if Madeline enters a reputable treatment facility in the US, which I will arrange and pay for. The message sent with a decisive click that felt oddly anticlimactic for something that might destroy what remained of our family. Hours passed with no response, but Rhonda's updates kept coming. The buyer had arrived, an elderly gentleman with a security detail, checking into the same hotel. My parents and Madeline were seen entering his suite at precisely 2 p.m. By 2:45, Rhonda confirmed through hotel staff that champagne had been ordered. "They're celebrating," I realized with a sick feeling. At 3:15, my phone finally lit up with a text from Dad: "What's done is done. The money will help Madeline heal. Someday you'll understand." Something snapped inside me at those words, the final thread of restraint I'd been clinging to. I called Marcus, my voice deadly calm. "Execute everything. All of it. Now." Within 30 minutes, Sheriff Reeves and 2 deputies were escorting Montana State Police into the Four Seasons, armed with warrants and the full weight of my rage. I didn't go with them, couldn't trust myself to maintain composure, but Rhonda's play-by-play painted the scene in excruciating detail: my mother's hysterical protests, my father's stunned silence, Madeline's collapse into tears, the buyer's furious threats of lawsuits as officers confiscated the ring and arrest paperwork was processed. The ring was recovered, that was the important thing, though I took no joy in the images Rhonda sent of my family being escorted through the hotel lobby in handcuffs. The buyer, evidently with significant political connections, was released with a warning after claiming ignorance of the ring's stolen status. My family wasn't so fortunate. Their processing took hours, and I arranged bail before nightfall, unable to stomach the thought of them spending the night in cells regardless of their actions. Marcus advised against contacting them directly, but I couldn't help sending one text to the family group chat: "The ring is back where it belongs. I've paid your bail. What happens next depends on you." Their silence was both expected and deafening. I sat alone on Gran's porch that night, the recovered emerald heavy on my finger, watching distant lightning split the sky over mountains that had witnessed generations of Harringtons before me. In that moment, surrounded by everything I'd inherited and everything I'd lost, I made a decision that would permanently alter our family's trajectory, one that would either heal the deepest wounds or sever the final ties that bound us to each other. The weeks following the arrests unfolded like scenes from someone else's life, a nightmare playing out in slow motion while I observed from behind glass. My parents and Madeline were released on bail with conditions that prohibited them from leaving the state, effectively trapping them in Montana despite their Seattle home. They rented a small house in Bozeman, 30 miles from the ranch, creating a buffer zone of rolling hills and carefully maintained silence. My attorney advised minimal contact during the pending case, but the ranch became my fortress, the place where I could breathe, think, and gradually rebuild my sense of security. The media caught wind of the story. Heiress has family arrested over $590,000 ring, and reporters began appearing at the gates, hungry for details about the wealthy family's spectacular implosion. I declined all interviews, but my parents weren't so disciplined. Mom gave a tearful statement to a local news station, painting herself as a desperate mother trying to save her younger daughter from addiction, portraying me as cold and vindictive, caring more about jewelry than family. The selective truth stung, but not as much as the silent support from neighbors who'd known our family for generations. The district attorney, impressed by the ring's value and the interstate elements of the theft, pursued charges aggressively despite my increasing ambivalence. The potential consequences grew more severe: felony grand theft, conspiracy, attempted trafficking in stolen goods, charges carrying possible prison time that seemed disproportionate to my actual desire for justice rather than vengeance. 3 weeks after the arrests, I received an unexpected visitor. Jack knocked on the study door one evening, hat in hand, his weathered face solemn. "There's someone here to see you. Says he's your father's brother." I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Uncle Robert, my father's estranged older brother who'd left Montana 30 years ago after a bitter land dispute with my grandparents. I hadn't seen him since childhood, knew him only from the occasional holiday card and family stories whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. "Send him in," I managed, straightening papers on Grand's desk, oddly conscious of my right to sit there now. The man who entered bore my father's height and build but little else, his face leaner, harder, marked by years spent weathering different storms. "Emily," he nodded, declining my offer to sit. "I heard what happened. Figured someone should tell you the whole story before you destroy what's left of this family." His bluntness was jarring after weeks of lawyers' careful language. For the next hour, Uncle Robert unraveled a family history I'd never fully known: how my grandmother had forced my grandfather to cut Robert out of his will after their disagreement over selling part of the original ranch land, how my father, though younger, had received everything due to his willingness to follow Grand's rigid vision for the property, how the emerald ring had originally belonged to their mother, not Grand's side at all, and had been promised to both brothers' children equally. "Your father never fought for me then," Robert concluded, eyes fixed on the ring now back on my finger. "But he's been paying for that loyalty his whole life, living under your grandmother's thumb, sacrificing his own dreams. Now you're doing to Madeline exactly what was done to me, deciding who deserves help and who doesn't based on who fits the Harrington mold." He left without waiting for my response, the front door closing with quiet finality that echoed through the house like a gunshot. Uncle Robert's visit left me sleepless, his version of our family history colliding violently with the narrative I'd always accepted as truth. I spent days combing through Grand's personal papers, finding fragments that supported his claims, letters between my grandparents discussing Robert's unfortunate choices and ensuring the land stays intact through William's line. Most disturbing was a journal entry from Gran dated just after my 16th birthday: "Gave Eleanor's emerald to Emily today. William still believes it will be divided between both girls eventually, but Emily is clearly the one with Harrington blood running strongest. Madeline takes after her mother's family, too soft, too easily swayed by emotion." The words made me physically ill, forcing me to confront the possibility that Gran's preference for me had been based not on genuine connection but on my willingness to become what she wanted. I'd been chosen not for who I was but for who I could be molded into becoming. This revelation coincided with the prosecutor offering my family a deal: reduced charges in exchange for guilty pleas, resulting in probation rather than jail time, plus mandatory counseling for Madeline. Marcus urged me to support the arrangement. "It gives everyone a way out while maintaining consequences," but something in me resisted the neat resolution. I requested a meeting with my family, neutral ground, no attorneys present. They agreed, surprisingly, and we convened at a small cafe in a neighboring town where we were less likely to be recognized. The four of us sat in strained silence until I placed Gran's ring in the center of the table, its emerald catching the afternoon light. I won't drop the charges completely, I began, watching their faces fall, but I'll request minimum sentencing if you tell me the truth, all of it. Not about the theft. About why you've always treated me differently. About what Gran did to Uncle Robert, to Dad, to all of us. Mom started to object, but Dad placed his hand over hers, his eyes never leaving the ring. You found her journals, he stated flatly. It wasn't a question. What followed was 3 hours of raw, unfiltered truth, decades of resentment, manipulation, and conditional love laid bare across the scarred wooden table. Dad described growing up under Gran's impossible standards, watching his brother exiled for wanting to sell his portion of land to start his own business. I learned to agree with her to survive, he admitted, but I lost myself, lost my brother, lost the chance to live my own life. Mom revealed her own struggles with Gran's thinly veiled disapproval, how Madeline had absorbed that same sense of inadequacy through osmosis despite their attempts to shield her. Madeline, sober now after weeks in court-mandated treatment, spoke last. I never wanted the ranch or even the money, Em. I just wanted to matter as much as you did. To be seen. When Gran left everything to you, it confirmed what I'd always felt, that I was somehow less worthy of being a Harrington. Her words struck me like physical blows, forcing me to see how I'd been both beneficiary and victim of Gran's manipulations, how my pride in being chosen had blinded me to the damage being done. As dusk gathered outside, I picked up the ring, turning it in the fading light. Gran used this to control all of us, even me. Especially me. She made me believe I was protecting a legacy, when really I was just perpetuating a cycle. I slipped it back onto my finger, but it no longer felt like a badge of honor, more like a shackle connecting me to patterns I was only now beginning to recognize. The legal proceedings dragged on through fall and into winter, but something fundamental had shifted within our family. The prosecutor, reluctantly respecting my wishes, amended the charges to misdemeanor theft with terms including probation, community service, and continued treatment for Madeline. Media interest gradually waned as more sensational stories emerged, allowing us fragile space to navigate our new reality. I hired an executive ranch manager, a woman with degrees in both agricultural science and business who shared my vision for sustainable ranching practices, enabling me to step back from daily operations without abandoning Gran's legacy entirely. This created room for what became weekly dinners with my parents and sister, initially stilted affairs where we carefully avoided landmines of the past, gradually evolving into genuine attempts to forge connections based on truth rather than obligation. The emerald ring remained in my safe, unworn, its significance transformed from treasure to teacher. As Christmas approached, I found myself drawn to Gran's extensive documentation of the ranch's history, particularly the detailed account of how she'd expanded the original property by purchasing adjacent parcels over decades. One file contained surveys of a 120-acre section that had once belonged to the neighboring Peterson family, land that I discovered had originally been part of the property Uncle Robert had wanted to sell for his business venture. The pieces clicked together with stunning clarity. Gran had systematically built the ranch not just through shrewd business acumen as family law suggested, but by strategically eliminating threats to her control, including her own son's brother. The revelation cemented my growing determination to break cycles rather than preserve them. After consulting with my new manager about operational requirements, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable months earlier. I would divide the ranch. Not randomly or vindictively, but thoughtfully, preserving its viability while acknowledging truths too long buried. The week before Christmas, I invited my parents, Madeline, and most surprisingly to them Uncle Robert to the ranch. They gathered in Gran's study, now largely transformed by my own books and photographs mingled with hers, the space less shrine and more living workspace. I've been thinking about legacy, I began, unsure how my words would land but certain they needed to be spoken. Not Gran's legacy as she defined it, but what we want the Harrington name to truly mean going forward. I unveiled large maps of the property, with clearly marked sections highlighted in different colors. The main ranch operations, about 200 acres including the central buildings, equipment, and best grazing land, will remain intact as a working cattle operation. I'm establishing it as a corporation with shares divided between all of us. I let that sink in before continuing. Dad, Uncle Robert, these 75 acres on the eastern boundary are being deeded to you jointly, to do with as you see fit. It includes the parcel Gran bought after preventing Robert from selling his portion. Robert's weathered face registered shock, then a complex emotion I couldn't quite name. Madeline, this 40-acre section with the creek and old foreman's house is yours outright. I've had architects draw preliminary plans to renovate the cabin if you want it as a residence or retreat space. No one spoke for several long moments, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant lowing of cattle being moved to winter pasture. Dad broke the silence, voice hoarse with emotion. You're dividing what Gran spent her life building. It wasn't quite accusation, not quite question. I met his gaze steadily. I'm recognizing that what she built came at too high a cost. The ranch will still function as a cohesive operation if you all agree, but each of you will have autonomy over your portion. Real choices, not performative freedom with strings attached. Mom, who had remained largely silent through these months of reconciliation, suddenly reached for the folder containing the legal documents. You've already filed these transfers? Without knowing if we'd accept. I nodded, something like peace settling in my chest for the first time since the day they'd taken my ring. The transfers are complete regardless of whether you choose to be part of the ranch operations going forward. This isn't contingent on your forgiveness or participation. It's simply right. Madeline was openly crying now, not the manipulative tears from before but something quieter, more genuine. What about the ring? She asked, surprising everyone. I retrieved it from the safe, placing it on the desk. I've commissioned a jeweler to reset the emerald into 3 smaller pieces, pendants that will contain a piece of the original stone. The setting itself, which dates back to the 1880s, will go to the Montana Historical Society along with documentation of its full history, the true history. Uncle Robert, who had maintained stoic silence, finally spoke, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. Your grandmother would hate every bit of this. A smile, the first real one I'd seen from him, creased his face. It's exactly right. Spring came early to Montana that year, as if the land itself was eager to shed the weight of winter and secrets. The emerald, now divided into 3 identical pendants, had been presented at a small ceremony where we'd each shared truths about our experiences in this complicated family, pain and joy, resentment and love, all given equal voice after decades of selective storytelling. Dad and Uncle Robert chose to sell their joint parcel to a conservation trust, using the proceeds to establish a foundation supporting rural entrepreneurship for young people wanting to remain in agricultural communities without being tied to family operations. Madeline, 6 months sober and discovering genuine passion for environmental science, began renovating her cabin into a combination residence and field research station for watershed protection studies. My parents decided to remain in Bozeman rather than return to Seattle, rebuilding their marriage on more honest footing while establishing careful, respectful boundaries with each of their daughters. The ranch itself thrived under shared stewardship, with quarterly business meetings that sometimes erupted into heated debates about management practices or investment priorities, but these conflicts occurred in the open now, without the manipulative undercurrents that had characterized Gran's leadership. I maintained my primary residence in the main house but traveled frequently, both for ranch business and to explore interests I'd never permitted myself while striving to be the perfect heir to Gran's legacy. During one such trip, a sustainable agriculture conference in Colorado, I met Julian, a veterinarian specializing in large animal care who looked at me with clear eyes that saw Emily the woman, not Emily the Harrington heir. Our relationship developed slowly, both of us carrying complicated histories, but by the following Christmas, he joined our now expanded family gathering at the ranch, witnessing the still awkward but increasingly genuine connections being forged around the holiday table. On the anniversary of Gran's death, I visited her grave alone, the Montana wind whipping across the small family cemetery on the ranch's western ridge. I don't know if you'd be proud of what I've done, I told her granite marker, but I know it's right. The land is still here, still productive, still Harrington land, just not the way you imagined. I touched the small emerald pendant at my throat, matching the ones now worn by Mom and Madeline. The ring didn't shatter when we divided it. It multiplied. 3 women now carry what one controlled. As if in response, a red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding thermal currents with effortless grace, the same bird Gran had pointed out to me countless times during our rides across the property. "The land endures," she would say, "and so do we." Walking back toward the main house where Julian waited, where family would gather later for dinner, complicated, imperfect, but genuinely caring family, I realized Gran had been right about that much at least. The land remained, and so did we, transformed but unbroken. Looking back from the vantage point of 2 years since that terrible day when I discovered my ring missing, I marvel at how completely my understanding of wealth has changed. The ranch operations have actually expanded under our shared management, with innovative sustainability practices attracting attention throughout the region. Dad and Uncle Robert have reconciled in ways I never thought possible, their foundation already supporting 12 young entrepreneurs. Madeline, now completing her master's degree, brings university research teams to her section of the property, her confidence growing as she builds expertise in her chosen field. Mom has started painting again, a passion abandoned decades ago under the weight of Gran's subtle disapproval. And I've found balance between honoring the land I still love deeply and building a life that isn't defined solely by inheritance or obligation. The emerald's value, once measured only in dollars, has multiplied beyond calculation through its division and the healing that followed. When visitors ask about the family cemetery with its generations of Harringtons, I tell them the full story now, not the sanitized version Gran preferred, but the complicated, painful, ultimately redemptive truth of who we were and who we're becoming. Some legacies are meant to be protected exactly as they were created. Others require breaking open to release their true value, like geodes whose rough exteriors give no hint of the crystals within until the necessary fracture occurs. Our family shattered, yes, but in rebuilding, we discovered something far more precious than what was lost. And that's the end of my story, everyone. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me through this journey that completely transformed my family and my understanding of what true wealth means. Sometimes the things we think will break us end up being exactly what we need to rebuild something stronger and more authentic. The emerald may have been divided, but our family is finally whole. If you found my story meaningful, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories of family, legacy, and transformation. Drop a comment sharing your own experiences with family inheritance disputes or difficult choices you've had to make for the greater good. I read every single one.